Good morning. Today we look at Judges 11 and 12. And um, the Israelites were up against some trouble. The Ammonites had come against them, and Gilead, the Gileadites, Gilead had been a faithful leader. And Jephthah, who we start hearing about in chapter 11, says the Gileadite, the son of a prostitute, was a mighty warrior. His father, or Gilead was the father, but Gilead's wife had borne him many sons. So Jephthah, this son of a prostitute, was kicked out by the legitimate children, and you shall not inherit anything in our father's house, for you are not anything. You're the son of another woman. So Jephthah, it says, flees. He goes, lives somewhere else. And he has a band, a group of men who are kind of like him, outsiders, ruffians, trouble, outlaws, it says, outlaws collected around Jephthah and went raiding with him. So it's, the band of outlaws. And verse 4, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when they had made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead, his other sons, go to Jephthah, and they ask him to come, be our commander so that we may fight against the Ammonites. And he said, you're the very ones that rejected me. You kicked me out. You didn't want me because I am not legitimate. I'm not a full heir. I'm not worthy, But, they said, nevertheless, even though we rejected you, even though you aren't, 100%, and whatever, we have now turned back to you so that you may go with us against these Amorites. And so, Jephthah says, if you bring me home to fight against them and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head. I will be your leader. I will be the one to lead and guide, and he will be the new, they don't have kings, they have judges. They have people like Jephthah that are leading and guiding and instructing. And verse 12 is interesting because starting verse 12 through, 28 or so, is negotiation, diplomacy. Jephthah sends someone to this king of the Amorites and says, tries to figure out a way other than war, He says, what is there between you and me that you have come to fight against me? And he sends messengers back. Well, your people took my land, my ancestors' land. And Jephthah goes back, he says, well, it was, and he explains why, that, as the Israelites were fleeing, that, this king and this king and this king didn't let the Israelites pass peacefully through their land as they were spending this 40 years time in the wilderness. I mean, it's still going back to that. And he says, because of that, when we did cross into our promised land, God gave the land to us. It wasn't that we took it, it was that God gave it to us. Now, you take the land that your God, in verse, I think it's down here in 24, 25, somewhere in there. Starting in 23. Now the Lord, the God of Israel, has conquered the Amorites for the benefit of his people. Do you intend to take their place? Should you not possess what your God, Chemosh, gives you to possess? Verse 24. Our God, the Lord God, Yahweh, has given us this land. Now, why don't you just be satisfied with the land that your God gives you, Can your God deliver, more or less. But, this art of negotiation, diplomacy, and I don't think there's another one like it, for a long time of what we read, this trying to settle something without a war. Well, it doesn't come to that peaceful solution. Verse 28 says, the king of the Ammonites did not heed the message that Jephthah sent him. So the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Jephthah. And Jephthah makes a vow to God. And he says, Lord God, if you deliver these Ammonites into my hands. If you provide us with success in this battle, I will offer up to you the first thing that comes out of the door of my house when I return. And I mean, red flags should go off in our heads when we see something like that, right? Jephthah goes and with them to battle, and they are very successful in their battles. Verse 34, Jephthah came home, and there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and with dancing. She was his only child. Remember the pledge that Jephthah just made. Whatever first comes out of my house, I will sacrifice to you. His daughter, his only child. And what goes into my head when I read this is certainly this God of mercy and grace will make an exception. Certainly this God of mercy and grace, just like with Abraham and Isaac, provide another way out. But I'm reminded too that, it wasn't God asking. It was Jephthah making the vow. Jephthah honored the vow. I mean, his daughter asks, let me have 2 months that I may go wander the mountains, that I may, live, and then I will come back. And that's what happens. And Jephthah offers his daughter as a sacrifice to God. It hurts. It hurts. I mean, truly. But again, it's that reminder of, God's promise to us. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Jephthah made a pledge to God. God makes a pledge to us in his Son, Jesus Christ. We're in Holy Week. Thursday, we're going to witness his Last Supper of the Passover with his disciples. Friday, we will witness his crucifixion. And next Sunday, we will celebrate the resurrection. But it's a reminder for us as we read these Old Testament stories of the faithfulness of God, of God's willingness to do everything for us, of God's leading and guiding, granting success to this Jephthah in the battles against the other people. Verse 12, the men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they went to Jephthah and said, well, why did you cross and fight and didn't ask us to help, And so they're mad. They're mad because they didn't get asked to help. And Jephthah's response, my people and I were engaged with a conflict, but when I called, you didn't help me deliver from their hand. When I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life and I crossed against them, and the Lord gave them into my hand. So why do you come this day to fight against me? They don't really want to help to start with, and then now they're mad because they didn't, and they're going to, why would they war against that? It's stupid. But Jephthah gathers his men, and they fought against the men with Ephraim, and with the men of Gilead defeated Ephraim because they said, you are fugitives. And, it's just terrible things that are happening. And then they come, verse 5, it says, the Gileadites took the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And whenever one of the fugitives said, let me go over, let me go free, are you an Ephraimite? They would say no. And they said, well, then say Shibboleth. Just say this one word, Shibboleth. But they would say Sibboleth because they couldn't pronounce it correctly. It's just, have you ever tried to, the word, and you try to say it? It reminds me when, I don't remember what, 3rd, 4th grade, somewhere back in there, I was asked, we were reading, and I read aloud, and I came to a word, and I said, the woman went along, and it was supposed to be women. And the teacher stopped me, and she said, read that again. And I could not pronounce women. I tried. And the teacher got upset with me. She thought I was just, but she finally called on one of my classmates, and my classmate read, the women went on, and I said, but they couldn't pronounce this word. And it was the difference between, knowing and not knowing. And anyway, it's just, I feel their pain. I feel what's going on here. And So Jephthah judges, it says, Israel in verse 7 for 6 years. And then he died and was buried. And then Ibzan came, and then they talk about he had 30 sons, and gave his 30 daughters to marriage outside, and and he judged for 7 years. And so I make the assumption that these years of Ibzan and of Elon and of Abdon, as they, they're not saying, the Bible doesn't say he did evil in the sight of the Lord. I assume that they properly served the Lord and regarded him, because where we start tomorrow, the Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we're reading the continuing saga, the story of the growing pains, and the growing pains continue today, right?